back, my fellow peanuts. I'm in another new location. I decided to switch it up a little bit. So I have changed my whole entire little office area. So you can see now that I've got these little babies. I do have my map just here. I've got my reading cart just here. So this is my Peanuts snow globe. Then we've got our usual. So we've got our Snoopy, and Snoopy. And then you can't see her, but Charlotte is all the way over there and she is just been a little bit restless. So hopefully she's not too bad. Unfortunately, the blinds might not block out necessarily my little courtyard, but that's okay. There is also a little Frankie going around at the moment. So you may get an opportunity to see our little Frankie. So welcome back, my fellow peanuts. Thank you so much for being patient for my newest episode. Welcome to anyone who is new to Crimes from the Peanut Gallery. Now, this podcast does cover true crime cases that may not be suitable for young listeners. So let's just have some listener and viewer discretion is advised. Now, today's episode, it does include some accounts of some manipulation, coercive control, branding, sexual exploitation, and grooming. Please listen with a lot of care for this one. So I do just want to remind everybody that we just need to be more careful. I'm opening a multi-part series on NXIVM, the self-help group that turned into a sex cult, we'll call it. It's starting with the man at the center today. So I'm going to be starting with Keith Raniere. Now, before I even get started on this episode, guys, I have probably been wanting to do an episode on NXIVM for quite some time. I've watched The Vow, I've watched Seduced, so I've watched a lot of things. I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I've heard from so I mentioned on a couple of episodes back, I listened to the one on Alice Mack. There was Lauren Saltzman on one of the podcasts as well. So if anyone who's sort of been following it, you can definitely get a feel for what all these people have gone through. I do want to say that I do have some empathy towards Lauren and Alison, but not a whole lot. I think they were very much manipulated and I think there was some absolute coercive control there. But I'm not always hearing a lot of accountability, and I hate that word. I really do hate that word, guys. But I feel like there's not enough of I was at fault, and perhaps that's what I would like to hear, essentially. I mean, that's just me from an outsider. Again, it's not really my place, but it is my podcast, so I am going to give my opinion. However, I digress. So let's get back to Keith Raniere. He's also known as Vanguard. Now, in this episode, I'm sort of going to talk about how he built a glossy world of seminars and sashes and how the world quietly evolved. His whole world evolved into a criminal enterprise and how his romantic relationships served as conduits for loyalty and control. We're going to walk through some of the formation of NXIVM and the Executive Success Program, ESP, and the inner mechanics of DOS, Dominus Obsequious Sororium. I think that's the way you say it, Obsequious Sororium. So, and we're going to talk about the federal investigation that followed the 2017 New York Times expose, the 6-week trial in 2019, and the 120-year sentence that he received. He also did some appeals in 2022 and this year. Along the way, we are going to be hearing about some of the perspectives. So it is certainly from the documentaries The Vow and Seduced. But a quick note on some of my sources, I will put them potentially into my description throughout the episode. I rely heavily on, especially for this one, primary documents, press releases from the attorney's office for the Eastern District of New York, court filings, opinions, as well as some of those documentaries and some of those podcasts. Now, to give you a brief overview of Keith Raniere, he's born on August 26 in Brooklyn, New York. He's an only child of James, who's an advertising executive, and Vera. She's a ballroom dancer instructor. When Keith was about 5, the family would actually move to Suffern, New York in search of a little bit of a quiet life, but the move sort of didn't bring them any peace. Money was a little bit more tight than usual, and it didn't bring the hope that they wanted, right? So it caused a lot of strain on the relationship themselves. And his parents' relationship would become quite strained as a result of this. So they would fight quite often. And as only child, Keith had no siblings to confide in or distract him from this kind of tension at home. But by the time he's 8 years old, his parents are separated and his father had actually moved out for good. Now, this would leave he and his mother alone. Her health began to decline. She'd actually suffered from heart disease, and when Keith was only 13 years old, she underwent open heart surgery. Now, the roles in the household were quickly reversed. Keith actually became her caretaker and making sure she took her medication, helping her through her recovery. The fear that his mother could die at any moment, it sort of haunted him quite a fair bit. And that sense of isolation that he was starting to feel deepened quite a bit in this time. His father, meanwhile, starts a new life with another woman, and he's largely absent throughout most of his childhood, leaving Keith would say is he navigated adolescence without little support. His mother's health actually continued to deteriorate, and she began drinking really heavily. The house was really quiet. Keith would spend a lot of time alone. He'd read, he'd study. He was described as quite a bright student, but his social life was somewhat limited apart from what we'll get into a bit later. He completed 9th grade at Suffern High School, then he transferred to Rockland County Day School for 10th and 11th grade. Despite his instability, though, at home, he excelled academically and was accepted for early admission into, I'm going to say this wrong, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute at just the age of 17. Sort of though at this stage, we're starting to see some of those abandonment or those emotional scars of his childhood. Former partners and his friends would actually say that he had a sense of abandonment, and that's where his need for control could be traced back to. It just marked a lot of his life. It seemed like he was quite lonely, there was loss, and there was just sort of a need to be for him to feel like he's really special, but also secure. Now, according to one account, Keith's father had actually told him repeatedly how gifted and how intelligent he was, and it was like a switch in his head just went off. He began to see himself as far more superior than others, almost like a deity. This belief in his own exceptionalism would become what defined, really, the rest of his life. There is heaps of stuff in regards to this, guys, in regards to that flip and that switch for him. He just seemed to really embrace being better than everybody else, and it wasn't a good thing. Now, why NXIVM? Why Raniere? Now, NXIVM's sales pitch was irresistible to most people. It's a boutique coaching company that's promising personal and professional advancement through a method called rational inquiry. Now, recruits pay thousands for intensive and moved through different sort of phases with sashes, and that symbolized their advancement. Centers opened in the US, Canada, and Mexico. Notable attendees included actors, quite wealthy people, which we're going to get into later. And these are the kind of names that gave that program a real feel that was legitimate. Now, beneath all of that marketing, prosecutors would later describe NXIVM as a racketeering enterprise built to only benefit Keith. In June 2019, a federal jury in Brooklyn convicted him of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and attempted sex trafficking. There was sex trafficking conspiracy and forced labor conspiracy and wire fraud. There was acts of extortion, identity theft. There was a bucket load, and apparently in there was some child pornography. In October 2020, Judge Nicholas sentenced him to over 120 years in a federal prison. In December 2022, the Second Circuit affirmed these convictions and clarified the statutory phrase, anything of value in the sex trafficking law can include non-monetary benefits such as an elevated status in NXIVM, while in October 2025, the court rejected his bid for a new trial, stressing the amount of evidence that they had. But what makes NXIVM different from those usual cults is that it was really polished. It had a really corporate feel to it. There's hotel ballrooms, there's flip charts, there's exercises, there's after hours volleyball, and it's just really, really careful curated language. So on the surface, you would really believe that this was self-improvement. And the deeper members went, the more empowerment meant obedience to the man at the top. I am telling you right now, guys, the amount of podcast documentaries, everything that I have genuinely listened to, I would have absolutely thought that this was a really good program as a person, right? So I just want to give everyone some context that it would have been easy to fall into that trap. Just getting back to what he actually studied at the Polytechnic Institute, he studied maths and science and worked as a programmer. By his 20s, he's chasing this aura of genius. Press mentions high IQ clubs, the kind of claims, true or exaggerated, definitely build a mystique. Even before NXIVM, though, his business instincts, they tilted toward that multi-level structure, that pyramid schemes. So I don't think he started out as essentially as a the pyramid scheme. So I don't want to say that that's how he started. I don't want to say I think he started out as a bad guy. I don't think he was a good person. All the claims of him and his IQ and stuff like that have proved to be, I wouldn't say false, because I do think there is a certain level of intelligence for a lot of these cult leaders that they have essentially in them, because they are able to manipulate and they're able to read people's emotions and they're able to get that control and that coercion. So to a certain level, I would think that you do need that intelligence. Now, good or bad, it was not used for good at all, especially by Keith. Sorry, I digress again. In the early years, he actually launched a company called Consumer Byline. It's a multi-level structure that promised discounts over membership. This company drew multi-state investigations and was shut down. Now, Raniere settled civil claims for $40,000 and accepted a ban from chain distribution schemes. It's hard to not see this echo, though, because NXIVM would replicate some of those characteristics of a pyramid scheme. Tiers of advancement, relentless recruitment and upselling courses, while adding a vocabulary of ethics and science that made it seem more noble than commercial, essentially. Now, I think to understand NXIVM, we have to sort of understand how Keith he actually used intimacy. His romantic relationships, they weren't incidental. They're a part of an infrastructure, and they're always, his partners become recruiters, confidants, gatekeepers, and ultimately some really big cautionary tales. But they're all hidden from each other. They're all unknown to each other at the time. So he's got, I hate using this word, a harem of women, but that's what he essentially had. We're going to start with Tony Natali. She met him in the early 90s when she and her then husband were recruited into Consumers Byline. Now, she would be a top seller that turned into his girlfriend. And Tony spent 8 years with him. Her memoir and interviews describe this extreme manipulation, rituals, exercise designed to desensitize, tests of loyalty and boundaries, blurring those lines and calling those tasks growth. When she left in 1999, she says she received a wave of harassment. Civil suits, alleged break-ins, intimidation that a judge would later describe as retaliatory. She even called herself Patient Zero, the early template for how Keith wielded power over women through those psychological games, legal pressure, and isolation. There is a really, really fabulous podcast, and I will try and post it into my comment section. And she's actually interviewed, and a lot of it is based over on her memoir. And it was really fabulous to sort of understand her, because she meets Nancy. Nancy will obviously get into later as well. I'm actually going to do a podcast on her, a podcast episode on her and Lauren in this 3-part series. But it's really, really interesting the amount of manipulation he had when it came to Tony, and the ability to get the most intimate details out of a human being and to use that to manipulate them. Absolutely disgusting. But, we all know he's a revolting human being. So in 2000, we've got the financial planner, Barbara Boucher. She falls in love with him. She said she fought it a little bit. She joined NXIVM, rose in status really quickly, and later became a really vocal critic after leaving. Her account sort of helps us see the emotional economy inside NXIVM, how love and proximity to Vanguard became currency, how questioning that economy risked social exile and how many women reconciled contradictions before doubling down on their belief. Now, I've got to tell you, Barbara's story is really, really hard to actually read about, even to hear about. She lost millions. She was a really, really wealthy woman before she went into NXIVM, and this was through a lot of hard work and a lot of hard discipline from her end. So this was all on her own. And he is absolutely disgusting what he did to her. He used her money. He lost all her money. It was just appalling what he did. And after she left, the amount of disgusting things he did to retaliate, it was just absolutely disgusting. Now, you've got by the lake. Sorry, hang on. Sorry, guys. I'm just going to. Oh, dear. Let's put you here. Let's put you here for now. So sorry about that, guys. So by late 2000s, Kristen Keith, a long-time insider, was romantically involved to Raniere. She actually has a child with him, a fact that is kept in massive secret in part because he prohibited pregnancies among the women in his harem. In 2014, she escaped with her son and provided documents and knowledge of NXIVM's inner workings that would actually help investigations. Her story on how secrecy about her own child was weaponized, and it ended up producing quite a massive amount of dependency, and how the architecture of control beyond that seminar rooms was into her family life. Now, I've got to say, another story that was absolutely vile. What happened to her? She actually ended up signing her rights initially over of her son. And I've got to tell you guys, never been so disgusted in my whole entire life hearing her story as well. She was integral to him. She had been with him, I think, I would have to, and I'll put it into perhaps my next episode on how long she'd actually been with him. And then you've got Nikki Klein. She's from Battlestar Galactica. She was married to Alison Mack. She spent more than a decade connected to him and had publicly defended him quite big, especially in part 2 of The Vow. She contends that the women in NXIVM knew exactly what the deal was from up front. She was coerced. She was in DOS. Now, go to the website, the Frank Report, where she actually ends up, she writes something on Keith, and you have to read it because after publicly defending him for years, she reneges on it all. Now, I don't think she reneges on NXIVM, though. She just reneges on him. So finally, we've got the mother-daughter axes of Nancy and Lauren Saltzman. They captured the blending of intimacy and hierarchy. Now, Nancy was a former nurse trained in hypnosis and NLP. She co-founded NXIVM and would become prefect, the second in command. She later would plead guilty to racketeering conspiracy and in September 2021 received a 42-month sentence and forfeitures. Lauren, her daughter, who became the first-line DOS master, pled guilty. She was one of the only ones that testified in his trial against him, and a judge sentenced her to probation, community service in light of her cooperation. Reporting and testimony, though, indicate both women had intimate relationships with Keith at different points, a fact that blurs the line between personal loyalty and organised control and shows how much power actually existed in those high tiers. If you get a chance, watch the second part of The Vow. Nancy gives quite an account. I can't remember, and I'm shooting myself. I should have written this down. There is accounts Lauren does speak on a podcast. I will find it. I'll put it into the comment section. I do want to have a lot of sympathy and empathy for Lauren because she was probably groomed from the age of about 17 because that's when Nancy met Keith. So I think I've got a lot more empathy towards her. But perhaps I'll go into that a little bit more on the Lauren and Nancy episode. So you've got NXIVM's public face begins in 1998 when Keith Raniere and Nancy Saltzman launched this executive success program. The goal, they said, was to create a rigorous rational framework called rational inquiry. It's to identify and dismantle those personality limitations. People would sit for hours getting these things called intensives. They would role play ethical dilemmas. They'd learn a whole bunch of new jargon. Doubt itself became suspect. And to question NXIVM it was characterized as a limiting belief. Now, these were the optics for legitimacy everywhere, professional. So there were massive optics at this stage. So there's professional venues, there's websites, there's brochures, attendees who conferred prestige. And some of these attendees, right? So you've got Alison Mack, you've got an heiress by the name of Claire Bromphon. She eventually underwrote aspects of the enterprise and would later plead guilty also to felony charges. The coloured sashes did more than just mark progress. They gave you a visible hierarchy, what you could achieve, and you could see your position. So you could measure how close you were to vanguard. For many, that proximity felt like proof of your personal growth. In reality, it actually probably meant more closer surveillance on you. And it didn't just sell classes, it managed reputational risk. Now, according to federal findings, Nancy Salzman and others compiled private financial data about their perceived enemies. They altered records in civil cases and they used litigation to quite often to intimidate any defectors. Inside, members were encouraged to cut negative influences, including family that criticised the programs. Outside, the organisation pushed hard back on journalists and consultants who challenged what they were. The company's tone mixed moral superiority with a legal muscle, and that combination, ethics talk plus intimidation, kept many people quiet for many years. To see how the coercion grew, though, focus on a daily life. Survivors and former insiders describe how the tools of NXIVM slid over time almost into obedience. So language did a lot of that work for them. It reframed discomfort as resistance and normalized surveillance as accountability. Sleep and diet were carefully managed in the most disgusting way, I might add. Women in the inner circle of DOS were often kept on an extremely low calorie regimen. 500 calories a day, guys. Absolutely disgusting. And late night volleyball with Raniere was a ritual that made healthy boundaries really hard to maintain. Readiness drills meant responding within seconds to text prompts from your master, and missed drills would lead to penalties. Mentorship became intimacy, though. So an intimacy became leverage. So private things that you would discuss over what you would think is just a private conversation, they would be shared over intensives, and it would actually become a pressure point for you. So in your own words, they would be used against you. So silence almost felt like it was a safety net for you. The tactics sound clinical, but they produced very human outcomes: confusion, shame, and loyalty built on a fear of loss and abandonment. Academic analyses after the trial mapped these behaviours to be known as grooming strategies in cults. So the systematic erosion of autonomy through micro decisions, slow isolation, and staged rituals that reframe harm as empowerment. So NXIVM works really, really hard to manufacture credibility. In 2009, the organisation actually hosted an event that brought the Dalai Lama. Now, that sort of gave them a lot of leverage in NXIVM's messaging, that it was a spiritual validation for them, that they were a group that the Dalai Lama agreed with. But over time, reporting raised questions about the circumstances of that visit and the influence of some of those wealthier people inside NXIVM. But for members, the optics were really powerful, though. If a global spiritual figure appeared within the group, surely it's not going to appear to be a harmful group to join, right? So this kind of reputational, and combined with the celebrities that were in there, that language and a science-based, it helped NXIVM get more recruits and more people, and it calmed the ones that were thinking about leaving. In about 2015, this is when DOS was sort of formed. So the inner circle formalized a secret society called DOS, Dominus Obsequious Sororium. It's literally framed as a women's empowerment sorority, and in practice, unfortunately, as seen by the prosecutors and witnesses, that it was a master-slave pyramid. And at the top, it was Keith Raniere that was concealed from all of those initiates initially. So below him sat those first-line masters that included Lauren Saltzman, Alison Mack, Nikki Klein. There's a whole bunch of them. I'll try and find that sort of that map that actually shows you who they were. Entry requires collateral though, and this could be nude photos, it's written confessions, whether they're true or false, but they're intensely private matters, and some of them even had contracts that gave them rights to assets. Collateral was collected not once, but repeatedly, and it's creating that constant threat. If you left, you spoke out, your secrets are going to be exposed. Women in DOSC were tasked with readiness, responding within seconds from their masters to commands placed on these disgusting diets, justified in texts and lectures about discipline and health and empowering yourself. The structure created a real level of obedience, though. Slaves were owned by their masters, and unfortunately, they were really owned by Keith Raniere. Then there's the branding. Survivors recount these ceremonies in which women were held down without any anesthetic, without any numbing, without anything, and they're branded near their hip, basically near their vagina, I might add, with a cauterizing pen, while restraining them down by the other women. Many didn't understand that emblem actually encased Keith Raniere's initials. The language of the initiation, though, it served as an honor. Women were compelled to say, "Yes, master, please brand me. It would be an honor." This is absolutely revolting. I'm sure everyone's heard about it. It was absolutely disgusting. By October 2017, though, former members took their stories to the New York Times. It published an exposé detailing all about DOS, the collateral, the branding, and it sort of sparked a lot of panic through NXIVM. Encrypted messages were deleted, and within months, federal authorities had ramped up their investigation because it had all been such an exposure. Now, after that 2017 exposé, the US Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, working with the FBI and other agencies, pursued a case that widened quickly from sex trafficking to racketeering. So on March 20th in 2018, Mexican authorities deported Keith Raniere after he was found near Puerto Vallarta in a luxury villa, and prosecutors unsealed a complaint charging sex trafficking conspiracy, forced labor conspiracy, describing DOS and the use of their collateral and those threats. A month later, the indictment expanded to Alison Mack, alleging she recruited women under the guise of mentorship group that was actually, in fact, created by Keith Raniere. By July 2018, a superseding indictment charged Raniere, along with Nancy Saltzman, Lauren Saltzman, Kathy Russell, Claire Brompham, with racketeering conspiracy and related crimes, including identity theft, extortion, forced labour, money laundering, wire fraud, and the obstruction of justice. Over time, though, each of those defendants pled guilty, and it left Keith Raniere on the trial, all alone on his trial. The government's filings sketched a picture of a criminal enterprise designed to protect and promote his power, to silence critics, and to exploit women through coercive systems marked as empowerment. Now, his trial begins in the spring of 2019 in Brooklyn, in a federal court, and ran for roughly about 6 weeks. The government presented witnesses, exhibits spanning decades, recordings, emails, photographs, testimony from former insiders. Lauren Saltzman, that first-line DOS master, took the stand and described the structure of DOS in graphic and very, very a lot of detail, including group nude photos that were sent to Raniere with those branding marks visible, late night sessions, and staged rituals in which women sat nude on the floor while he remained clothed and elevated. She described the hierarchy, the expectations of that obedience, and the functional of collateral in keeping women silent. Digital forensic evidence linked Keith to explicit photographs of a minor known as Camilla, corroborating predicates acts of child exploitation within the racketeering count. The jury heard how NXIVM's language and structures, sashes, drills, penalties functioned as stepping stones towards that control. So in June 2019, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. In statements afterwards, prosecutors emphasized how Raniere disguised exploitation as self-help and training personal development into a veneer for coercion. The sentencing hearing in 2020 was emotional and quite harrowing for a lot of people. 15 or more victim impact statements were read, including Camilla's, describing abuse beginning at the age of 15. Now, the judge imposed a 120-year sentence and a $1.75 million fine, ordered restitution for 21 victims, including compensation for past and future plastic surgery to alter and remove those brands, and commented on the extraordinary harm that was caused. Keith was designated to USP Tucson, a facility that houses sex offenders and provides specialised management. Upon appeal, though, he challenged aspects of his sex trafficking convictions. Just one moment, guys. Megs, come here. Go to bed. Come on, go to bed. Sorry, guys. 12-year-old is just having a little bit of a moment, so you'll have to excuse me. Just 1 second. Okay. So in December 2022, the Second Circuit rejected the narrow reading, holding that anything of value includes non-monetary benefits such as privileged status within an organisation, and the court would hold up his convictions. In October of this year, seeking a new trial, he argued that the evidence had been fabricated. The appellate court declined, noting that even setting aside disputed claims, the record contained a mountain of evidence supporting the jury's findings of sexual abuse and child exploitation. That sentence still stands. But the aftermath, the co-defendants, the survivor narratives, the legal endgame was only part of the story. Inside NXIVM's community, lives had been rearranged over years. Some women left with branded scars, physical reminders of those ceremonies, and it's framed as empowerment. Survivors have had to seek out a lot of therapy, rebuild family ties, and pursue careers away from the shadow of the group. Now, documentary series have helped amplify their voices. The Vow walked viewers through the emotional arc of insiders who became some of their biggest whistleblowers, overlaying private footage with interviews that showed how the language and loyalty were engineered. We've got Seduced, which that was really centered around India Oxenberg's perspective, tracing how her mentorship became a pipeline to DOS and how her mother, Catherine Oxenberg, fought relentlessly to pull her out and get her out of that cult. The co-defendants' outcomes varied. Nancy Saltzman, she's received a 42-month imprisonment and forfeitures for racketeering conspiracy, acknowledging acts of identity theft and obstruction. Lauren Saltzman, because she cooperated and she gave very specific testimony, the judge credited her by giving her probation and community service rather than prison time. Claire Bromfrom, the wealthiest of them, whose funds they really helped sustain NXIVM's legal offences, received 81 months and a sentencing appeal of the court has upheld. And Alison Mack pled guilty to racketeering, was sentenced to 36 months and was released in July 2023. She has begun publicly reflecting on her role and her responsibility. There remain ongoing debates, mostly outside the courtroom, among a handful of loyalists who still continue to regard DOS as empowerment and deny any type of coercion. But the courts, they didn't believe it. They saw that the collateral, they saw the branding, they saw that forced obedience and sexual exploitation. And that was forcing them for accountability and telling them that they were going to be healed if they were a part of this group. So the rest is really just a cautionary tale about how charismatic leaders can co-opt the language of ethics, therapy, and science to produce obedience, and how important it is to be independent. And if something doesn't feel right, get out, get out, get out, get out. Now, most of the time while I'm covering serial killer crimes, red flags, so sorry. This is a really, really obvious one to me. There's no body count, right? But there is a body count. It's just the victims are alive. Now, NXIVM forces us to pay attention to the softer signals, how a professional polish is not proof of safety. Corporate structure can hide coercion. And if a program claims proprietary tech but resists outside evaluation, start to worry. If criticism is reframed as weakness or a lack of ethics, start to worry more. Start to use your brain. Start those red flags. And if your disclosures are collected as collateral, get the hell out of there. Consent, it's dependent on freedom. In DOS, the threat of exposure and isolation corrupted any type of choice. Women said yes inside a system collaborated to punish the word no. And intimacy plus hierarchy is combustible. When the leader is simultaneously the romantic partner, the mentor, and the leader of ethics, power multiplies. The only antidote is external perspective and boundaries you refuse to let anyone move for you. NXIVM ends up in court, and it began in hotel ballrooms where people genuinely wanted to improve themselves. That desire, earnest and human, it's exploited. It's why I'm going to end part 1 with this. If an organization demands secrecy, collateral, or obedience as proof of that you're evolving as a human being, you're not evolving. You're being groomed. Walk away. Talk to your family. Talk to someone, because your life, it belongs to you. Oh, hello. That's my Oscar. Come on. Come here. Do you want to meet the people? You can meet the people. You can meet the people. All right. Thank you all for listening to part 1 of my NXIVM series. Today, we've traced the arc from Keith Raniere's early life to the founding of NXIVM, the inner mechanics of DOS, the federal case, the verdict and the sentencing, and the appeals that failed. We've also had a chance to explore Tony, Barbara, Kristen, Nikki Klein, Nancy, and Lauren Saltzman that show you how intimacy powered hierarchy. In part 2, we're going to be talking about Nancy and Lauren Saltzman. We're going to be talking about some of the wording of that collateral, the branding ceremonies from those different points. And also, I'm going to be doing part 3, but I'm going to leave that to part 2 before you can find out who I'm going to be talking about. But if you did find this episode as chilling as I did, please subscribe, leave me a comment with your thoughts, any questions. Share this with someone if you think they're going to enjoy it. But stay safe, my peanuts, and I'll see you and have a fabulous weekend. See you in part 2. Bye, guys.